Todd Cooper here from America's finest city, a standards guy in San Diego, California. Thank you for joining me for this next 20 minutes or so as we look at one of my favorite topics, safe, effective, and secure medical device interoperability, with a particular focus on, can we make sense of all these standards? There are so many of them, as you can see from the logos that I've presented here. These are all different organizations that develop standards that get used in this area of medical device interoperability. So hopefully, in the next few minutes, we'll be able to take a journey down through some of these standards and a strategy for how we are hoping to make sense of them all. Join me. But first, some definitions. Standard guys love acronyms and definitions. One is SDO. You already heard me use this, a standards development organization. And you saw the logos from various of these, and I trust you've seen them used many, many times. Also, SES, which stands for Safe, Effective, and Secure. I use this as a simple reference to Joint Working Group 7 standards. We'll talk about that later on. But I also use it to kind of describe the community of interest that creates those standards. That is a community that's formed out of experts in quality, regulatory affairs, and legal concerns, legal liability. Think about the process guys, those who are saying, well, how do we know it's good enough? It has high quality. How do we know that it is safe and effective and secure and would be approved by regulatory agencies? So SES. And then I also talk about MDI, Medical Device Interoperability. When I say that, I am in this discussion really focused on interoperability from the device interface. The devices may interface with the gateway to your electronic health record or some other system, but I'm talking about medical device to medical device at the bedside, from the device interface to another device directly. This community that develops these is typically research and engineering, the tech guys, okay? By the way, I am by nature a tech guy, just so you know. And then also just a few more. SDC, Service-Oriented Device Connectivity. It's a new family of standards from ISO and IEEE. Basically, it's service-oriented architecture, SOA, applied to medical device interoperability at the bedside, at an acute point of care. Think about a surgery table, all the equipment around a surgery table, or an ICU bed. All the monitoring and infusion pumps and ventilators around an ICU bed. Service-oriented device connectivity, SDC. Also, we have SDPI. I love that one. SDPI, which is an IHE profile of SDC, Service-Oriented Device Point of Care. Again, that bed, interoperability. Profile, by the way, is a word that we use to say you have these three standards, and standards are general. There's lots of detail, but you know, for our need, our application, we'll just choose certain subset of that standard that is needed to solve the problem we're looking at. It's a profile. You look at the whole standard, but you select out only that which you need and use that. And then finally, FHIR. Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. This is an HL7 standard that really is taking the world by storm, and it's based on RESTful architecture, resources. And fast here, by the way, means it's fast to develop products with, not that it runs really speedy. It's easy to use this to pick up resource widgets and to create applications using that. So these are just some of the acronyms. Hopefully, you'll remember them. I love them. But then I'm a standards guy. So does it have to be this hard? With all these standards and all these organizations and all this stuff, does it have to be this hard? This is a cartoon that reminds me of myself. How often I'm trying to solve a problem and I don't read the obvious signs. So hopefully by the time we're done in this discussion here, you'll say, oh yeah, actually, I think that it would work. That would make this much more easy. So the problem of multiplicity, multiple standards development organizations and their standards, there's a lot of them. Problem number one, okay, all these standards, all these SDOs, all of them just results in confusing complexity. Anyone who has approached this topic of device interoperability and says, oh, let's look at the standards, before very long they're like, who are all these guys and why are there so many and how might I use those? The impact of that is you need a standards PhD degree to sort out what is relevant to your application, your device, your software app, and what is just noise. Second problem, SES and MDI communities. Again, safe, effective, and secure process quality perspective. MDI, more of the research and engineering techie communities, they just don't work well together. Within companies, you find that they don't like each other. And then when they draft standards, guess what? Those standards are developed kind of in decoupled parallel universes. And as a result, they reflect that lack of integration or integratability. Problem number three, from having so many standards development organizations and so many standards, the requirements across all of these are inconsistently specified. The way it's said in one standard is not exactly the way it is in another. They're not conformity assessment ready. As a result, it's hard to say, well, how do I show that I've implemented it fully and correctly? They're not integratable. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Impact. Companies have to spend large amounts of money to be able to tackle standards-based interoperability. That results in inefficiency. It doesn't have to be this hard. And a status quo rut. A rut is a hole. It's like, this is the way we do things. We're kind of stuck there. We'd like to do them better. Boy, my phone sure works a whole lot better. Why can't my devices work like my phone works? But we're stuck in that status quo because of how hard it is. Problem number four, real-world products have to achieve this integration in an ad hoc manner. In other words, they say, well, it's a regulated device. I have to support these 5 standards, but those standards don't integrate well. There's no way of showing how they work together and profiling them. So we just have to pick each one and figure out what we're going to do. Impact. Companies have to form requirements management teams, a competency within their organization, people, and develop expensive tools costing millions of dollars just to manage this challenge. But what is the ultimate problem? The ultimate problem is that companies have finite time and finite resources for product development. They don't have years, generally, to be able to put this together. They say, okay, we need to have an interface that needs to interface with my phone or a cloud-based system. Let's see, we'll have engineer Fred do this. We'll give him 3 months. Fred spends 3 months trying to figure out what standards, how do those work, who are all these different organizations, what is relevant, what do I have to do? They're out of time. What is the ultimate impact of this ultimate problem? Huge standards? Forget it. We don't have the time. We don't have the resources. That is the sad reality for medical device interoperability today. I can say, since I've lived through most of this, after 40 years of effort, it actually started medical device interoperability in the early to mid 80s. After 40 years of effort, it does not exist, especially from the device interface. We've been talking about plug and play device interoperability for decades. It does not exist for exactly these reasons. That's the ultimate impact. You make standards to be able to have them implemented, adopted, used to improve the quality of healthcare. It just doesn't work. Is there hope? Okay, that's the problem. Todd, in America's finest city, is there hope? As we ponder the next 40, will we be wandering around? Or will we actually get on with the business that those who have gone before us have tried to do. Okay, well, let me answer this question. What do you standards guides do to make sense of it all? Well, of course, we write more standards about it. There's piles and piles of standards. But we also build frameworks, ways of looking at various standards and subject areas that help us organize this and understand how they relate to each other. So, the Joint Working Group 7 SES guys, again, quality, regulatory, legal liability process guys, standardized their own framework. We call it the temple diagram. This is a work of art. The temple diagram, you can see at the top, is talking about safety, effectiveness, and security across the life cycle. So it defines this life cycle with its three main phases. And who are the key entities accountable? The manufacturer or the healthcare delivery organization, like a hospital? What are the different phases? What are the responsibility across those phases? This is a framework. And then they have in the bottom, you'll see terms and definitions. So what is the language that we use to talk about the different concepts here across the life cycle? And what are some other subject areas that are also go across this life cycle, like quality management across each one of these life cycle phases, security or privacy or risk management. So this is a framework that SES developed. By the way, Joint Working Group 7 is between ISO TC215 and IEC SC62A. I hope you remember that. There will be a test at the end of this. Joint work. So that's a good sign, by the way. Joint work. Two SDOs working together. So they standardized this model in 81001-1 standard, which is in final ballot right now. It should come out later this year, and over which you can make sense out of very specific standards. For example, a standard for health software, 82304-1, or for risk management of IT networks that incorporate medical devices and health software, 80001-1. With this framework, we can see where those plug in and fit. And with a process, quality, regulatory, legal, SES community subject focus. So these all kind of have that focus. This framework is fantastic, and it helps us standards guys kind of keep track of where things fit and how they relate to each other. But what about the MDI guys? I told you I'm a recovering software engineer at heart. What did we do? Well, consider the SES MDI together Hanging Gardens framework. Yes, this is the famed Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Notice the Tower of Babel in the background. Typically, we tend more towards the Tower of Babel, and we lack our semantic interoperability. But what did we do? How did we define this? Hey, we created our own framework. It's a work of art, but it actually does help us keep things straight in terms of the standards and in terms of the layers and different boxes into which they fit. That helps us kind of keep track of the different parts of this. It always starts at the top with user narratives, use cases, scenarios, requirements about what is the problem you're trying to solve, real world needs. And then we can look at architectures, and then we can look like SOA. I already talked about SOA, service-oriented architecture for medical device interoperability. We can look at device specializations and health software specializations, an infusion pump, a physiologic monitor, maybe a closed-loop control therapeutic app. We can look at how do we achieve key interoperability properties and controls for safe, effective, and secure. This little green box is where 80001-1 might fit. We then have profiles, SD-PI plus FHIR profiles. We'll talk about them briefly, and implementation guides. So those are profiles. I mentioned those. And then we look at specific connectivity standards like the SDC, ISO IEEE SDC standards, module specifications. So within that, what does an HF, a high frequency surgery device, look like? Defining that. Participant key purpose standards. So how do you do safety across four areas? One would be basic connectivity for reporting metrics for alerting and for external control. Standards for that. And then the core SDC standards here. So all of these work together. On the left, you see safety, effectiveness, and security standards, which also apply across this. ISO IEEE standards for nomenclature and information models. Lots of standards, but this framework pragmatically really helps us put this together. And the intent is to be able to have a plug and trust interface that integrates all of this stuff. You'll see the URL at the bottom here, which shows where you can get more information for this. So, does this model really help, or does it just add to all the confusion? Okay, well, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, as we say here in San Diego, America's finest city. In this case, us standards guys. But consider this. The Gardens helps us make sense of specific standards from different SDOs in a pragmatic real-world product context. Here are different SDOs that are represented, their standards in various places here. And they all have a combined technical and process focus, SES MDI, because at the end of the day, you have a single interface at the bottom that has to integrate both SES standards and MDI standards from these different SDOs. So, is there hope? Yes, there is hope. I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about the Gemini SES MDI project. And you can get the year 3 update for this at this Confluence site as well. You'll see this slide there, which kind of talks about what did we do year 1, what did we do year 2, what are we focused on year 3. And what I'm going to tell you right now is a key area of focus that we think will have a huge impact on these problems that we're talking about. So, an innovator's challenge. I want to do things in an innovative way, but I only have one interface and I have all sorts of standards. Again, the Hanging Gardens framework provides a perspective on various standards and specifications that are integrated into each individual product's interface. One layer and one standard at a time. Each standard, you have to figure out how does that relate to my interface. That's a lot of work. Just think about that. That's what that team has to do. Is there a hope for innovators? Requirements integration. Think about this. How much simpler a streamlined requirements pathway through each standard's needs and capabilities would be. A happy path here charts traceability from the interface back to each standard's specification and their requirements. So you don't have to do all those multiple ones individually. What if we could have a happy path that allowed us to chart that course to the single interface and then show how the capabilities there meet the requirements across all those standards? What if it's not just one standard, but it's a different standard? So on the left is SDC, on the right is HL7 Fire. Maybe it's both. Maybe I have a use case that requires some use of Fire and then also requires some use of SDC, around the bed integration, Fire for enterprise or mobile, in the wild integration, if you will. Hey, how hard can that be? That's a lot easier than the previous multi-way integration. Well, in the absence of a clearly defined requirements interoperability model to enable this connection between standards, let's look at the Hanging Gardens model. How hard can it be? Well, you have to build integration from each standard, one standard at a time. That is pretty hard. And that happens in an ad hoc way. In other words, there's no standard way of saying how that maps to the interface. Each company that develops capabilities has to do this, has to figure it out. That's a lot of work. Every company has to do individually in a unique way. So, standards guys challenge. That's my challenge. Safe, effective, and secure medical device interoperability, requirements interoperability. So, what are we focusing in on with the Gemini SES MDI project this year, year 3. Challenge number 1, standards are inconsistent in how they specify requirements. So, a focus area is to establish a requirements interoperability model and inter-standard mappings, where we take the capabilities provided from one standard, maybe a standard API, and the needs or dependencies of another standard, and we link those together. We show how one standard can meet the needs and dependencies of another standard. That's the strategy we're taking. And to do that, you have to have a consistent way of mapping and linking, and that's a requirements interoperability model. Challenge number 2, crafting standards specifications that support requirements interoperability and that happy path tracing we showed earlier. The focus area to achieve that is to create authoring tools that transparently capture the computable artifacts necessary for this kind of standards integration automation. When I say transparently, I mean that the individual, the expert who is actually drafting up the content of the standard doesn't have to think about how all of this works. It all happens under the hood of the car, if you will, in the engine. That is a focus area, a second focus area. A third challenge is conformity assessment reports that are regulatory submission ready. Today, every product that has an interface that can be integrated with another has to come up with a unique way of documenting and proving that that interface is safe, effective, and secure, and baking that into regulatory submissions for approval. Focus area to address that is to generate test plans and test scripts automatically that ensure verification of the requirements along with the traceability and conformity assessment to any number of these standards and specifications. That is a high goal, but this is where we need to get to be able to really truly support innovation. And then the fourth challenge is to actually develop HTML continuous build publication processes and toolings that support implementation. Not just a document, a PDF document that anyone who adopts it and implements has to go back and figure out what that means, how to do that, and then go to all sorts of testing events and wring out all the details and all the problems. How can we actually, out of the standard, generate the artifacts, computable artifacts that allow them to implement it in a deterministic, quick way? And HTML-based, so web-based with a continuous build. So what are we doing for that? We're developing that publication tooling that enables frequent, I mean daily, continuous build updates. So not it'll be published next year. We have lots of good stuff, you'll have to wait. It's daily updated. And this kind of inter-standard integration and navigation between the various standards. For example, if I have a specification in IHE profile, like SD-PI, and then I have a FHIR implementation guide that is integrated with that, I could actually navigate in HTML from the one specification into the details of the other specification. Challenge? Yes. Doable? Absolutely. So, the next step to prove this out, is this really feasible, is a requirements interoperability pilot project that we've actually started within Gemini. This is the pilot standards. We said, well, let's pick some requirements from standards that are being used for the MDI that we're looking at. This includes use cases. We're focusing in on 2. A silent bed. How can you have the devices around a bed not make noise all day and night, but have a clinician properly notified outside that point of care? And then an isolation point of care where you actually have to put on personal protective equipment, PPE, to be able to go in directly with the patient. How can we support that? And then architectures, the IEC 60601, some requirements from there, 80001-1, that risk management standard, IHE profiles around SD-PI and FHIR. And then finally the IEEE, ISO IEEE 11073, some of those standards. So what does that look like? Well, we'll create that interoperability semantics UML model, that requirements interoperability model, using OMG's requirements interchange format, RequirementsInteroperability. Then for each one of these standards, we'll take a representative set of requirements, and then using the meta model, we will, using that meta model, and then we will create some interstandard mappings and links, and then finally we'll validate, can we do that happy path tracing from interface to multiple standards? We think it's doable. We'll know pretty soon. What is the next step for you? There are many opportunities to participate, to learn, importantly, to shape the future of SES MDI. This presentation is sponsored by the Medical Device Industry Promotion Foundation. They have lots of great programs, one of which is the Smart Medical Device Standard Expert Forum. Look into this, check it out, become involved. And then the Gemini SES MDI project is free and open to anybody. You just have to have an email address and a browser. So go to this URL on Confluence, sign up, and become involved. Thank you very much. Good luck, and hopefully this helped you make sense of it all.